Mr. Hasdovic's online lecture series, lecture number 10. The United States enters the Second World War. The United States entry into the Second World War would follow a pattern very similar as to how the United States entered the First World War. In the years directly preceding the First and Second World Wars, the United States loudly and demonstrably proclaimed neutrality, fiercely desiring to be left out of any bloody European entanglements. Just like during the first 2 years of the First World War, however, the U.S. had declared its allegiances in the Second World War well before officially intervening. In September of 1939, just as the Second War broke out, Congress passed the cash and carry provision, which would allow warring nations to buy U.S. arms as long as those other nations were paying for them in cash. The purchasing nations would also have to provide transportation for said material, thus hopefully avoiding another Lusitania situation. This policy would help our allies in Europe, Britain and France, carry on the fight against Germany. Cash and carry, however, seemed like throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. Nobody, save Hitler, knew how fast, powerful, and irresistible the Nazi offensive Blitzkrieg would be. When the Germans began their European offensive in the early spring of 1940, Denmark and Norway had both fallen within a couple weeks, by April 9th. Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg all fell 1 month later on May 10th. France was conquered in 1 month, falling by May 15th. Many amateur historians like to place blame for these nations' conquest upon the alleged combat ineptitude or lack of fighting spirit they possessed, but these allegations take a vast amount of credit away from the Nazis' strength. A vast war machine that combined artillery bombardment, aerial bombardment, and rapid troop deployment at a speed the Earth had never before witnessed. Blitzkrieg is the German word for lightning strike, an aptly chosen and well-deserved title for Hitler's brand of mechanized warfare. Further, the French had taken significant precautions against a second German invasion after World War I. In the years immediately following the First World War, France heavily invested in the construction of a massive fortification along its borders with Germany called the Maginot Line. Maginot consisted of over 100 miles of pillboxes, anti-tank and anti-air defenses, and dozens of miles of intricate tunnels connecting each strategic position. The line connected with Belgian defenses in the north to the Swiss Alps in the south. Designed as a defensive measure, the French hoped first that the Maginot Line would discourage any future German invasion along the shared border, or it would encourage Germany to invade neutral Belgium in the north, and in doing so, the French would then have enough time to reorganize and move their armies into new defensive positions. The Germans did invade Belgium, and the Maginot Line never fired a shot. Belgium, however, fell in less than 2 weeks, much faster than the French anticipated. The French didn't have enough time to divert their soldiers before Germany burst through its borders. So fast and so strong was the German offensive that the French barely had time to organize a massive retreat of its armed forces. The British came to the aid of the French, sending every naval vessel it could conscript, military or civilian, battleship or sailboat, to the beaches at Dunkirk in northern France. Hence dubbed the Miracle at Dunkirk, under the British leadership, over 300,000 people were evacuated from northern France, 120,000 of which were soldiers who would live to fight another day. But in the meantime, Great Britain was the only nation left standing between Hitler and complete conquest of all of Western Europe. Hitler's quick victories sent shockwaves around the world that loudly reverberated in the United States. Roosevelt then successfully lobbied Congress for more defense spending and initiated the first military draft during a time of American peace. As we also learned, by March of 1941, America opened up its factories and its checkbook to the Europeans, who resisted the Axis through the Lend-Lease Act. Just as we were by 1916, in 1941, America was openly arming and supplying the Allied powers in Europe, even though we were still officially neutral. Hitler ordered his submarine wolf packs to attack any convoys delivering goods to Britain or the Soviet Union, and once again the United States was fighting a naval war before it declared actual war against Germany. In In the Pacific, tensions during the 1930s between the U.S. and Japan continued to mount. Japan's increasing militaristic aggressiveness, which began in the early 1900s with successful campaigns of conquest against both Korea and the Eastern Soviet Union, as well as a bloody, brutal conquest in northern China, had the United States deeply concerned. How long would it take before Japan turned its empire-hungry eyes on the colonies of the American Empire in the Pacific? Japan's invasion of Manchuria threatened our grip on that nation's trade and resources as established in the open door policy. Further, the Great Depression, which had been ravishing our economy and depressing our production capabilities, had frustrated our one-time trade partners, who were also stinging under the second-class citizenship their people in America enjoyed, courtesy of the Gentleman's Agreement. When Japan tossed its allegiance in with Germany and Italy, the U.S. had no choice but to break off its trade with the Empire of the Rising Sun, and that meant no more American oil or steel, resources for which Japan would have to conquer even more were it to possess sufficient quantities of these industrial needs. As the U.S. saw it, trading these resources with Japan meant allowing Germany and Italy to have access to them, a counterproductive activity when considering the cash and carry and lend-lease acts. Still clinging to its isolationist diplomatic policy, the U.S. refused to launch an initial strike against Japanese targets, even though there were many in California who wanted the U.S. to do just that since very early in 1941. Japan would strike the first blow at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and the United States would officially, finally, be brought into the global conflict 2 years and 3 months after it began. Just like you. Why we fought. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, along with nearly a dozen other military targets scattered throughout the U.S. Pacific Empire, was the direct cause of why the United States fought in World War II, but it was not its sole motive. Many historians have debated what were America's true motivations behind getting involved in fighting World War II. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, however, clearly laid out 4 specific reasons, known as the 4 freedoms. FDR unleashed a mighty wave of propaganda to clearly explain to Americans exactly why we were involved in World War II. Roosevelt enlisted the aid of movie stars, radio stations, musicians, and artists alike to thoroughly canvass the nation with 4 unifying reasons to fight, stay in the fight, and win the fight against the Axis powers. The freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. These were the 4 freedoms America was fighting for in World War II. Through enlisting the aid of Norman Rockwell, the greatest American artist and illustrator alive at that time, Roosevelt quickly got the nation behind him and his war effort. If you went to the movies in the early 1940s, chances are you saw a newsreel toting Hollywood's stance on World War II that looked a little something like this.